West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
We begin tonight with just 3 weeks to go until the midterm elections on November 8th. But it's the day after the election that I want you to focus on. Just imagine waking up on November 9th and not knowing which party will control the House or the Senate or some key state offices. Imagine it taking weeks to finish counting all the absentee and military votes in states like California, where it literally does sometimes take weeks. So what we think is the result on election night changes, just like in 2020. Or imagine that there are lawsuits by the declared losers or fake audits, leaving lots of results in limbo. The delayed tallies actually are not unusual at all. They are literally how elections work. But these are anything but usual times, because Donald Trump is now the model for how lots of Republican candidates are likely to respond. In 2020, Trump's relentless claims that the election was stolen took our democracy to the brink. And now a majority of Republican candidates on the ballot, nearly 300 of them, echo that big lie. How are they going to respond if it takes a while to count the votes? In 2020, you had people who threatened election workers as ballots were being counted. And there are already threats against election workers going into this election, to the point where precincts are being equipped with panic buttons for poll workers and vote counters to use. So what happens if some of these Republican candidates lose? We got a preview from Arizona Republican Senate candidate Blake Masters, who is already claiming in advance that the election will be stolen because the state is using the same voting machines as it did in 2020. So, of course, rigged. Also in Arizona, the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Kari Lake, says the only way she will accept the result of the election is if she wins, which is what Trump said in 2020. And they're not alone. Last month, the Washington Post questioned 19 Republican candidates in key battleground states, and a dozen of them declined to answer or refused to commit to accepting the results. And we've all seen what happened when Donald Trump defied reality in 2020. What could happen if these candidates refuse to concede in races all across this country? Right now, in the nation's capital, 5 members of the extreme right-wing group, the Oath Keepers, are on trial for seditious conspiracy tied to their role in the January 6th attack, which again was a physical war waged against the fact of Trump losing the election. The Oath Keepers, along with other extremist groups like the Proud Boys and the Three Percenters, they've got members throughout the country standing back and standing by, awaiting their next orders to be posted on Truth Social or 8chan or Gab. Our democracy is still in critical condition from the last election. So the question is, can it survive another round of attacks? I'm joined now by Barbara McQuaid, former U.S. attorney and law professor at the University of Michigan, and Tim Miller, writer at large for The Bulwark. Thank you both for being here. I want to read a New York Times headline, Barb, and get your take on it. And this is what the New York Times writes. In the 2 years since 2020, Groups of right-wing activists have banded together, spreading false claims of widespread election fraud or misconduct. Now those activists are inserting themselves in the vote count with a broad and aggressive effort to monitor voting in search of evidence that confirms their theories. Many activists have been mobilized by some of the same people who tried to overturn Trump's election in 2020. You have groups like Truth Social that are like, we want to make voting feel like you're being followed by the police. You've got Ron DeSantis activating the nation's only election police and already bragging about arresting people. These vibes to me, Barb, feel like they're setting up to do what Trump did, but literally nationwide. How concerned are you about the same kind of threat?
I'm very concerned, Joy. I'm concerned about the lack of legitimacy after the election, but I'm also concerned about the effect this kind of behavior can have on voter turnout. It could indeed suppress the voter turnout. If you are fearful that there is an election police that's going to be at your polling place, you may choose to stay home. Or it could cause just the kind of cynicism of people not knowing what to believe. These elections are rigged or they're not going to be fair anyway. And so people might just stay home and not come out and vote. And so all of those scenarios are very bad for democracy. So I think it's very concerning. And it is a state of where we've come in America, that if you don't like the outcome of an election, then just lie about it and say that you won. It's a terrible thing for a country that believes in self-government.
And Tim, it's interesting. I mean, I think you can go back to 2000, and there were a lot of people who said, not my president, about George W. Bush, right? After he, lost the popular vote and won the election. Like, our system builds in this possibility that you can lose the popular vote and still be elected, which is itself problematic for continuing people's faith in democracy. But in the last 20 years, you've gone from that and people questioning the results in 2000 to people literally saying Joe Biden is a hologram. He's not really the president. He's propped up in the basement of the White House. Trump is really the president. And literally willing to fight and kill to establish that as the real facts, when that's the facts in their head. And so I wonder if you, as somebody who used to be about reforming the Republican Party, are you concerned? Because I honestly cannot envision any of these Republicans doing a speech that like John McCain did when he lost to Barack Obama.
Yeah, a lot there, Joy. Or Al Gore, excuse me, in 2000.
Or Al Gore, yes.
Think about my childhood. I think about those sore loserman bumper stickers that used to be on, play on Gore Lieberman. And those that was like Republicans back then, proto-lib owning, like dunking on the Democrats. Oh, you get, or you're such sore losers. But in reality, compared to what is happening now, you couldn't have lost in a more dignified manner than Al Gore did in 2000. An actual close election. Donald Trump got killed. He lost. There were 4 states that needed to flip for Donald Trump to win. It wasn't a particularly close election. And yet still, we saw what we saw on January 6th. So, look, I do think that the difference between then and now is extremely dramatic. And I'm concerned. I think that there are certain places where Republicans will talk a big game. We saw this with Larry Elder in California last year. He talked a big game without not accepting the results, and then he didn't follow through. Not everybody is as demented as Trump in being able to pull off something like this. But I do worry about certain places in particular, and you just showed Arizona, I think, is a prime spot. Kari Lake does seem like she has the Trumpian ability to just deny reality and be forceful about it. And we saw, and I worry not just about the turnout, like Barb says, but about the safety of election workers in places like Arizona, where these kind of threats are already happening in the lead up to the election. And I think that we probably will not know on election night, at least one of those 2 or 3 important Arizona elections, Senate, Governor, and Secretary of State. And so then we will have this period, like we did in 2020, of a couple of days where things will be unknown. You can imagine mobs assembling outside of voting places where they're doing the counting or the recounting, taking in the absentee ballots. So I think that's something to be concerned about. And the fact that no one is speaking up about Kari Lake, I mean, even the quote unquote good Republican Glenn Youngkin is campaigning for her this week. Right? There's nobody that is, even back in the Trump era, at least we're a handful of us that were saying, no, this is wrong. No one is saying that now. And I think that's a very bad trajectory.
Yeah, and again, Youngkin is like a book banner. So it's like, I don't even know if he's the good Republican. But I mean, the thing is, Barb, on that point, the great Steve Bernanke, when we sit and talk about, sort of what's going to happen in elections, he's the guy who sort of explains the mechanics of these things. California is a slow counting state. So we literally might go into election night not knowing who's going to, for instance, control the House, because there are so many congressional seats in California. Let's say they take a long time to count them. You could literally think one thing on election night about who's going to control the Senate. Let's say it looks like the Republicans are going to assume control. And then 2 weeks later, when California finishes counting all its ballots, the Democrats control the House. There's nothing illegal or nefarious about that, because that's just actually the time it takes to count votes. But you have a whole slate in Arizona, a whole slate of them, who are all running as election deniers together as a ticket. You have people like Masters, and you have people like Mastriano in Pennsylvania, who are all primed to take that scenario, which is literally the scenario that Trump faced, and say, see that? Democracy is a lie. This election was a lie. We won. And then how do you stop mini insurrections across the country? We already saw people get close to violent in Arizona last time. This is what I worry about, is that it'll get violent in multiple states at the same time. Are you worried about that?
I am, Joy, and it's very destabilizing for not only our democracy, but our national security. We are held up as a beacon around the world as a model for democracy. And when our elections become dysfunctional, other nations point to that and they mock us, and it makes it harder for us to spread democracy around the world. If we had responsible leadership, leaders would be saying right now, look, folks, we've got to be patient. It may take a while for election results to come in. And it's different from the way it used to be. Yes, it used to be that we knew on election night. That's because we did a lot less voting by mail and allowing more access to polling places. This is the new reality, and this is good for democracy. It just takes a little longer to know the results. Instead, we have people saying just the opposite. We were leading early, and then suddenly it flipped very suspiciously. There's a reason for that. But that is the message that they are exploiting to seize power and just to sow chaos. There will be some who believe an election was stolen, and those who will say an election was stolen, even they don't believe it, because they just want to cling to power and grab power. And there are people who will believe them and help them to make it so.
It is Tuesday, the 18th of October of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Okay, well, are we on the brink of nuclear war still? Maybe. Vladimir Putin is rattling his nukes, and apparently mentioning that means that you want to bring on the nuclear war, because I got to blame Joe Biden for everything, because we are dealing with a satanic cult, Absolutely. It's the only, plausible explanation for what the hell is going on. They purport to be Christians, and yet one of them, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the white Christian nationalist, she says that Warnock is not a real Christian. The pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King was the pastor. He's not a Christian, but she is. All right. Now, do you know why we had a separation of church and state? Because of exactly that BS right there. And why did people not run on their religious biases and ideologies? Because we are America. And now we're not. Okay. We've been warning people about it, and I guess we just didn't yell loud enough, and we were too fatalistic. Oh, well, I guess. Somehow we lost the messaging game. Yeah, we lost the messaging game because we ceded the powerhouse aspects of media to the right wing on all levels, from the very top all the way down to the janitor. And it's that right-wing Burgermeister industrialist money that is moving this fascist takeover right along. And there is historical precedent for it, and I've mentioned it so many times, it's ad nauseum. Well, if the fascists do take over, do we consider it a legitimate government that we're just going to heel to? Or are we going to stand our grounds and get our country back? And what does that mean? Yeah, I think we all know what that means. We stand in the middle of the street and carry signs and wear armbands, and they'll have guns and clubs. Because somehow we are the evil ones. We are the pedophiles. And yet, how many right-wing youth pastors have been taken away and thrown into stir for being pedophiles? How many ministers? How many GOP operatives have been arrested for abusing children sexually, huh? I know that it's not supposed to adhere to one political spectrum, but there's one political spectrum that screams to high heaven about how we are baby blood-drinking pedophiles, Satan worshipers. And we've been saying all along, you know what, I don't think you protesteth too much, Anton LaVey. Actually, Anton LaVey was a nice guy in so many respects. I'm just saying that if they think that we are the devil worshippers, they sure do protest a lot about it, as if they might be hiding something in their own closets. All right. Well, we got a full-blown anti-Semitic movement now, and I guess we're going to have to give it some legitimacy, too. Because people's opinions are people's opinions, and their actions are exactly what will happen because of their opinions. Okay, that's your opinion. Maybe we should punch the Nazis then. It's interesting that in Madow's retelling of the attempted Nazi takeover during just before World War II, when the German Bund was hot and heavy and getting the butchers of the day. In fact, I'm going to tell you something. The American-German Bund that was part of the attempted Nazi takeover of America, they became butchers. There is a direct line between them and the butchers, which then is a direct line to the Tea Partiers and the maggots. Just saying. Just saying. What's interesting is that this attempt to take over America in violent and other ways was exposed by anti-fascists. Anti-fascist groups who infiltrated these Nazis and turned them over to the cops. Problem is now that you have an FBI who is whining, apparently. Many agents are just whining that, why do we have to prosecute the January 6 rioters? They were just there trying to save their government. If there are any law enforcement, military, or intel types that believe that, they should be out on their ear, and they should be made to wear an ankle bracelet so we know where the hell they are and what the hell they're doing. No more Mr. Nice Guy. They fomented an insurrection on the day that we were supposed to validate the vote, to keep that validation from occurring, to the point they were willing to kill the Vice President of the United States and anybody else in government they could get their hands on. How is it that someone like Michael Flynn can get this PBS Frontline documentary about he's on a holy war? Well, why is he not in jail? He's a traitor. He was working with a foreign government to take down America, and he's able to travel the country and foment a holy war. Can you imagine any Black Panther doing what they are doing? Given giant stadium events talking about taking their country back, and by any means necessary, and couching it in some sort of religious fervor. How long would that last? Not very long, and we know that. But somehow, Michael Flynn can travel the country with he's not on a no-fly list even. There were Quakers who protested our war in Afghanistan, and they got put on no-fly lists. Michael Flynn worked for a hostile foreign government, got found out, gets pardoned by another asset agent for a foreign government who happened to be president. How is that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we think that the rules have to apply to everybody, and yet, I'm sorry. It is correct. The rules apply to everybody. Even Michael Flynn, and that guy should be in jail. And we know it. We better start setting our foot down or if you think bad things are happening now, jeez. So, of course, the right wing is pulling out all the stops. Crime is rising. Crime is rising in Republican-held territories. And they're letting it happen on purpose so they can show their people, look what the Democrats are doing, when they are the ones in power allowing the crime to increase. That's the only places where crime is increasing. Crime is down everywhere, even in New York. But it doesn't fit the narrative because they want to color those crime stats with color, and you know what I mean. But when you see those who are arrested, heavily tatted, skinhead Nazis. Okay. Well. Are we going to hell in a handbasket? I don't know. I would almost proffer that hell is here and now. And there is a thin veil between our concept of heaven and our concept of hell. And I suppose it takes us to make a choice about what construct will predominate, will be the predominant dimension in this multi-dimensional universe. Well, maybe. Yep. All possibilities are possible, apparently, in the multi-dimensional universe. So if that's the case, maybe we ought to make the possibilities a little more into our favor. Can we? I sure hope so. I do. I really do. Okay, well, we're just getting far flung here, and why don't we, or far afield, I'm sorry. Why don't we settle down and get into the curated part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And, of course, at the top, yes, Arizona's Kari Lake is just one of hundreds, over 300, by the way, of Republican election deniers on the ballot this fall. If you are an election denier, I don't think you should be allowed to run. If you don't believe in our elections, why are you running in the election? They should not be allowed. People should be forced to take a loyalty test to the United States of America and its Constitution. No loyalty oaths to religious groups allowed. On the rest of the menu, U.S. businesses want the U.S. government to hide trade data used to trace labor abuse overseas because when Americans find out there's been a labor abuse overseas, they don't want to buy that product. Hundreds of volunteer groups are mobilizing to help voters confronting new election laws. And the National Labor Relations Board is tallying the votes in another Amazon Union election. After the break, we move to the chef's table where a leading Belarusian political activist was handed a 25-year prison sentence for opposing the regime. And a scathing report says UK police are getting away with lawbreaking, racism, and misogyny. Boy, that sounds familiar. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the chat room link there on the right of the page, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link across the page at our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds our way once a month, it really does help us pay our bills, and then we can fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance against those dark forces arrayed against representative democracy, not only in the United States of America, but arrayed against representative democracy around the world, and we cannot allow it to happen. So thank you for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. And all kidding aside, really, thank you for your generosity. Every little bit helps. The costs of our bills keep increasing, but it matters not one whit because we cannot stop. We cannot stop resisting. In fact, one might actually consider it to be a duty, and that is exactly what we consider it. So thank you for allowing us to fulfill our duties. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing so. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary, incidentally, 10 minutes before showtime, and you can then access the actual reportage and the full articles when you go to those show notes and links, and you can find them by following my Twitter feed because I have a lot of other stuff going on there too. Some entertaining and some, I don't know, maybe not. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, let us now tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which reminds me, James Corden got 86th from Balthazar in New York for being a dick. Just letting you know. He seems so funny. He seems so, I don't know. But apparently, he's very mean to staff. And quite the princess, apparently. So there you go. All right. Joshua Goodman brings us this offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A group of major U.S. businesses wants the government to hide key import data, a move trade experts say would make it more difficult for Americans to link the products they buy to labor abuse overseas. The Commercial Customs Operations Advisory Committee is made up of executives from 20 companies, including Walmart, General Motors, and Intel. The committee is authorized by U.S. Customs and Border Protection to advise on ways to streamline trade regulations. Last week, ahead of closed-door meetings starting on Monday in Washington with senior officials from Customs, Border Protection, and other federal agencies, the executives quietly unveiled proposals they said would modernize import and export rules to keep pace with trade volumes that have nearly quintupled in the past 3 decades. The Associated Press obtained a copy of the proposal from a committee member. Among the proposed changes, making data collected from vessel manifests confidential. The information is vitally important for researchers and reporters seeking to hold corporations accountable for the mistreatment of workers in their foreign supply chains. Here's how it works. Journalists document a situation where laborers are being forced to work and cannot leave. They then use the shipping manifest to show where the products end up, and sometimes even their brand names and whether they're on a shelf at a local supermarket or a rack of clothes at a local mall. The proposal, if adopted, would shroud in secrecy customs data on ocean-going freight responsible for about half of the $2.7 trillion in goods entering the U.S. every year. Rail, truck, and air cargo is already shielded from public disclosure under U.S. trade law. Customs Border Protection said it would not comment on ideas that have not been formally submitted by its advisory committee, but said the group's proposals are developed with input gathered in public meetings. But one of the CBP's stated goals in creating what has been dubbed a 21st century customs framework is to boost visibility into global supply chains, support ethical sourcing practices, and level the playing field for domestic U.S. manufacturers. Reports by the AP and other media have documented how large quantities of clothing, electronics, and seafood make their way onto U.S. shelves every year as a result of illegal forced labor that engages 28 million people worldwide. And much of that investigative work, whether into clothing made by Uyghurs at internment camps in China, cocoa harvested by children in the Ivory Coast, or seafood caught by Philippine fishermen toiling in slave-like conditions, starts with shipping manifests. In its 34-page presentation, the Business Advisory Panel said its goal in further restricting access to customs data is to protect confidential business information from data breaches that it says have become more commonplace, severe, and consequential. Well, if that's what you call investigative reporting, maybe we ought to keep it up. Sudin Thanawala and Gary Fields of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Rhonda Briggins spent much of Election Day in 2020 at an Atlanta polling place handing out water and snacks to encourage voters to stay in an hours-long line to cast their ballots, something her historic black sorority has done for decades in Georgia. This election, Briggins and some of her thousands of sorority sisters are trading that role for a potentially more contentious one, ensuring voters are not disenfranchised by a slew of new voting restrictions passed by the Republican-led legislature. They include a ban on giving food and drinks to waiting voters. Yes, something that had been done for decades. The law, which a federal judge allowed to go forward this election cycle, was too confusing for the sorority to take a chance doing its traditional line relief, said Briggins, chair of the Delta Sigma Theta Strategic Partnerships Task Force and a member of the sorority's Decatur alumni chapter. Or is that Decatur? Decatur alumni chapter. The line between criminalization and being helpful is too close, she said. We don't want to get to that point. Georgia is one of several states where voters will face new hurdles to casting a ballot during the November election under laws passed by Republican-led legislators following Trump's false claims that voter fraud cost him the re-election in 2020. The restrictions have prompted groups that assist voters to reorientate themselves so they can avoid running afoul of new barriers. They anticipate confusion and conflict at the polls and are redoubling efforts to register and educate voters. Since 2021, lawmakers in 21 states have passed at least 42 restrictive laws. At least 33 of those are in effect for this year's midterms. Some include multiple changes, such as legislative packages in Georgia and Texas. Others, as in Arizona, are less expansive or in some cases not yet applicable. The 98-page bill in Georgia contained dozens of changes to state voting law. They include shortening the time to request a mail ballot, rolling back the pandemic-driven expansion of ballot drop boxes, and reducing early voting before runoff elections. The state had argued that the water and refreshment ban was necessary to protect against the potential for illegal campaigning and vote buying. State lawyers also argued that it was too close to the upcoming election to make changes. Hallelujah Hadero of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The nascent group that secured the first ever union victory of an Amazon warehouse in the U.S. is set to face a crucial test today when votes from yet another election are to be tallied. Representatives from the NLRB will be counting ballots cast by workers at a facility in the town of Shodak near Albany, New York. Roughly 800 people are employed at the warehouse, according to Amazon. This will be the fourth union election at an Amazon warehouse this year, and the third one led by the Amazon Labor Union. The upstart group secured an unexpected win in April at a company warehouse on Staten Island, but was stung by a loss shortly thereafter at another facility nearby. A union election in Alabama, led by the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union at a warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, remains too close to call. Amazon has been trying to undo the ALU's lone victory, filing more than 24 objections to the election and seeking a redo vote. Last month, a federal labor official concluded the union should be certified as a bargaining representative for the warehouse. Amazon, which has not recognized the union, said it intends to appeal the decision. And CEO Andy Jassy also signaled the company could take the case to federal court. ALU organizers say they're focused on petitioning for more elections and pressuring Amazon to negotiate a contract at the facility that voted to unionize. Experts note a win in Shodak, located near one of the most unionized metro areas in the country, would offer the group more leverage and a chance to demonstrate its prior win was not a one-off. Indeed. All right, let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60 Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. When someone tells you to sleep on it, they're usually suggesting that you avoid making rash decisions. But sleep is also widely known to help you remember things you've learned. Now, a nap might seem inconvenient when you're cramming for an exam, but don't worry, because a new study shows that rats who stayed awake after engaging with novel objects could remember seeing those things a week later, sometimes better than rats who'd slept. That suggests that long-term memories can be laid down without having to lay down. The results appear in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
We know that memory consolidation is promoted by sleep.
Marian Inostroza of the University of Tübingen. She says that decades of studies have shown that sleep helps to transform, or consolidate, recent experiences into lasting memories.
However, there is also evidence for consolidation into long-term memory during wakefulness.
And against this background, we became interested in the question whether sleep is the only condition, is a critical condition for the formation of long-term memories.
Jan Born directs the Institute of Medical Psychology and Behavioral Neurobiology at the University of Tübingen. For Born, the bottom line is,
do we need sleep to form long-term memories?
To find out, the researchers allowed rats to investigate a novel object. The animals were then moved to a resting cage, where some were allowed to snooze, while others were gently kept awake.
And we do that by very gentle knocking the cage where the animal is placed, or by taking very carefully the cage where the animal is located.
1 week later, the rats are returned to the testing cage and presented with the object they'd encountered previously, as well as one they'd never seen before. Now, if the rats remember the original item, they should spend less time nosing around it than they do sniffing the new thing. And it turns out that's the case for both rats that rested and those that pulled all-nighters, or all-afternooners. So, in this test, all the rats remembered the objects.
However, the kind of memories formed during sleep and during wake, they differ.
In our study, we could at least disentangle two very different kind of memories. On the one side, memories which are for recognition of an object, independent of the context, and on the other hand, those memories which are context and space dependent.
So, rats who stayed awake were actually better at remembering the original object than their fully rested counterparts, but only when the item was presented in a new location. Rats who'd gotten some shut-eye after their initial study sesh seemed thrown by the change in venue, and they showed no signs of recognizing the familiar objects when they appeared out of context. That suggests their memories were context-dependent, whereas for the rats who skipped the nap, context didn't matter.
In life, of course, wake is always followed by sleep.
So Born says the two paths to memory consolidation most likely complement each other, with sleep putting waking memories in their proper place.
So the wake state may, for example, serve to enhance the different events experienced during the wake phase, keep it in your memory until you go into the sleep phase, and the sleep phase puts these objects, these events into the right context, and in this way enhances a full-blown episodic memory.
Now, as to whether you might want to avoid dozing after you cram for an exam,
I wouldn't recommend this.
Of course, rats aren't people, and people aren't rats. So it's not really a fair question.
I think it is a little too early to infer based on our results, what students should do to be optimally prepared for an exam.
Nevertheless, Bourne does come down on the side of sleep.
I'm still convinced, although we cannot infer this from our studies, I'm still convinced that sleep leads to the overall more effective type of memory formation.
Plus, sleep gives your brain a chance to rest.
When you are not fully rested, it is in general more difficult to retrieve any kind of memory in comparison when you are fully rested.
And the findings suggest that 40 winks should help you remember not just the who, what, and when, but also the wherefore. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces, just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Throughout the country, newspaper subscribers are asking questions like, hey, who took my Saturday paper? What happened to those political cartoons and columns that I liked? Why does it take 2 days to get election results and sports scores? How did my local paper get filled with filler? Oh, and who doubled the price of the damn thing? The cause of all the above is a Wall Street concept called financialization, a euphemism for corporate plundering. Multi-billion-dollar hedge funds like SoftBank Group, Alden Capital, and Chatham Asset have bought up thousands of our dailies and weeklies. They extract enormous profits not by making a better journalistic product for customers and the community, but by eliminating reporters, selling off each paper's real estate and assets, shriveling and standardizing content, and jacking up the paper's price. Like avaricious airlines, the profit strategy of these Wall Street newspapers is to monopolize the market, then charge more for less. But won't readers stop subscribing? Of course, they're leaving in droves. But hedge fund profiteers don't care, for their plan is to strip mine the business of every dime it has, take the profits, and leave town. For example, SoftBank, the Japanese owner of the Gannett chain, has pillaged hundreds of our local papers and is now making another round of deep cuts in its newsrooms, including dumping some 800 more journalists. The financializers are also requiring other employees to take unpaid leave and are suspending payments to their pensions. SoftBank bosses simply said, "We need to ensure our balance sheet remains strong." This is Jim Hightower saying, sure, take care of number one, but what about ensuring that local journalism remains strong, providing the information and connections that communities must have for strong democracies? But don't be silly, that's not part of the hedge fund business model.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, and we're going all the way back to 1648. More than 100 years before the American Revolution, an early trade organization was founded in the colony of Massachusetts. They called themselves the Company of Shoemakers. Shoemakers were considered skilled craftsmen, yet changes in how shoes were made threatened their craft. The shoemakers were particularly concerned about low-skilled workers driving down wages. They formed their guild in an effort to protect their trade. This has been the basis for much of the trade union movement. The guild members argued that they were stopping, quote, the damage which the country sustains by occasion of bad wear. They wanted to set a quality standard for their industry. To ensure that standard, they set up an apprentice system by which new workers could learn their craft under the instruction of an established shoemaker. Nearly 4 centuries later, we hear similar declarations from union electricians, carpenters, and plumbers. Recognizing and promoting the professionalism and the skill of their craft is an important function for trade unions. Yet there were some differences between that early shoemakers guild and today's labor movement. One of the most notable was the names for official duties in the guild. Instead of president or secretary-treasurer, the shoemakers of Boston included titles such as a searcher, a warden, and a beadle. Another difference is that the Massachusetts colony outlawed the guild from, quote, fixing prices. So the guild could promote the quality of their work, but could not organize for specific wages. The skilled shoemakers were some of the earliest workers to organize together. Today's labor movement continues to walk in their shoes.
These boots are made for walking.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of about 82 to 84, pretty much about what we had yesterday. And it should be pretty much sunny skies throughout the day, and winds will be light and variable. Clear skies overnight with lows in the upper 40s, winds remaining light and variable. And then sunny tomorrow with highs about 87 to 88, winds light and variable. Looks like ragweed pollen is the predominant pollen right outside the window here in Rogue River, and it is rated as moderate. The air quality index for the region is good at 25 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the moderate range at level 3. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.17 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles. And that relative humidity is at 100%. We do have a continuing forecast for quite a bit of rain at the end of the week going into next week. And we will keep our fingers crossed because water from the sky is always a good thing. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's the Weather Underground. London is 65 degrees and sunny. Paris is 66 and cloudy. Rome is 77 and fair. Kyiv is 65 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 55 and clear. Hong Kong is 65 degrees with rain, showers, and lots of wind. Tokyo is 56 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 63 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 and partly cloudy. And New York, New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Joris Carmenow of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A leading Belarusian political activist was handed a 25-year prison sentence for opposing President Alexander Lukashenko's regime, the latest move in a relentless crackdown on dissent in the ex-Soviet nation. Mikolay Atukovich was convicted and sentenced by a Belarusian court on charges of plotting a terror attack, high treason, and a conspiracy to seize power. Along with Atukovich, 11 other activists in Belarus were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 2.5 to 20 years. Atukovich, age 59, is a former military officer and a veteran of the Soviet war in Afghanistan. He has helped the opposition raise funds for their efforts to oppose Lukashenko, who has ruled the ex-Soviet nation with an iron hand for more than 28 years. Lukashenko has brutally suppressed months of protests that were fueled by his being awarded a 6th term in office in a presidential vote in 2020 that was widely seen as rigged. More than 35,000 people were arrested and thousands beaten by police.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Jill Lawless of the Associated Press is the perfect reporter to be bringing us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Officers in London's Metropolitan Police Force are getting away with breaking the law, and the system for investigating police misconduct is marred by racism and misogyny, a report released yesterday, Monday, said. In the latest withering criticism of Britain's biggest police force, Louise Casey said some officers were getting away with both misconduct but also criminal behavior without getting fired. Cases are taking too long to resolve. Allegations are more likely to be dismissed than acted upon. The burden on those raising concerns is too heavy, and there is racial disparity across the system, with white officers dealt with less harshly than black or Asian officers, Casey said in a letter to Police Chief Mark Rowley. Casey, an experienced former government official, was asked to investigate the force after a string of controversies over misogyny and racism among officers. She issued an interim report yesterday, Monday, with her full findings due next year. In February, Cressida Dick resigned from her role as police chief after London Mayor Sadiq Khan said she was not doing enough to urgently overhaul the force and regain public confidence. In June, the force was placed in special measures by the country's police watchdog. The British government said it would review the system and procedures for firing officers. Rowley said the failings uncovered by Casey were completely unacceptable. I am sorry to those we have let down, both the public and our honest and dedicated officers, he said in a letter to Casey. The public deserves a better Met, and so do our good people who strive every day to make a positive difference to Londoners. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.